talking about a very important issue in relation to children with disability and education enabling them to have the skills, of course, to go out into the workforce. So Lynn's presentation today is titled Disability is Not the Issue, and please make Lynn welcome. Over to you, Lynn.
Thank you. Welcome to my presentation, and I'm just wondering why my picture isn't up there so I can see what I'm doing. Oh, the camera seems to have done its switch around again.
So what did you just hit to make it switch? If you just, whatever you pressed, if you could just press that again.
Oh, here it is.
And you weren't using slides, were you?
Yeah, we're no, not using slides. I apologise. I'm a carer, and I had very little. This was a last-minute thing that I was made aware of by a friend of mine, and I just, had to concentrate on getting it together. But I am going to present it at Toastmasters with slides. So slides will be happening at some point, but not today. But I welcome the opportunity to put this together because it's been something I've been wanting to put together for a very long time. I contend in this presentation that while having disabilities presents challenges to a young person, the barriers thrown up by nearly every system and service that a young person encounters compound the challenges, and they end up with lives damaged in terms of a productive work life and great harm to their long-term financial prospects. Huge dollars are thrown into services supposed to assist people with a disability, and yet most parents find these services are mostly unskilled, unhelpful, and often detrimental to the work trajectory of the young person and their overall well-being. Many parents opt instead for utilising their own resources and learnings to assist their son or daughter to find a micro-enterprise suitable to their child's needs and skills. They know that valued social roles are the way to achieving a good life. And a good life, of course, includes your work life. When you think about yourself, your work life is a big part of your life. Some find work through their own contacts via people who are willing to give them a go. And most times, the people willing to give people a go with a disability are very pleasantly surprised. I intend demonstrating the current state of the situation for people with disabilities with some facts, and then through the lived experience of my son, the impact of inequities on his life and that of so many others that I know. I will also discuss what is known to be helpful and what needs to happen for improvements to be made and sustained. The inequity lies in the inaccessibility to the workplace because of all the barriers and lack of appropriate support accommodations in the workplace. Firstly, some facts. Of people with disabilities aged 15 to 64 years living in households, 54% were participating in the labour force compared to 83% of the non-disabled population. And ABS data suggests the situation is unfortunately deteriorating. Australia has the lowest average personal income for people with disabilities. This is just 44% of income for people without a disability. Australia has a low international ranking for employment outcomes for people with disabilities, ranking 21st out of lowest employment rate out of 29 OECD countries. That was in 2011. And I do apologise for the ancient nature of some of this data, but there's not too much currently available. Australia's poor performance in the employment of people with a disability explains their low socioeconomic status, with 45% living near or below the poverty line. And yet, successful support and inclusion of people with disabilities in the workforce has huge economic value. And this is a study in the USA 2014 by the Institute for Corporate Productivity. Business process improvement increases productivity and efficiency, increasing profits. Workforce diversity improves innovation and creative solutions. People with disabilities are excellent workers, have high retention rates and low absenteeism. And a survey analysis of organisations that employ people with intellectual and developmental disabilities found companies hire people with IDD for business reasons and are rewarded with business benefits. The profile of a worker with IDD reads like that of the ideal employee, and positive reactions from employers abound. The challenges they found were fewer than expected and resources were greater than anticipated. So this is a USA experience, and I think it's a shame that we don't have some current, we need some Australian research of this, would be very helpful. According to Dr. George Teleporis in 2014, employment and disability, a complex problem with no simple solution. Ironically, it is a costly exercise to keep people with disabilities out of the labour market, with 15 billion worth of disability support pension payments made to over 800,000 Australians the last financial year alone. So that would have been 2013. So this is very ancient stuff. And he says if people with disabilities have sufficient personal assistance and equipment, they are more likely to succeed in the labour market. A 2011 Productivity Commission report predicted that the National Disability Insurance Scheme would result in an additional 320,000 people with disabilities being employed by 2050. Well, as you know, we are well into the NDIS system now. And I recently heard on the ABC that there is a return for every NDIS dollar spent, $2.25. We now come to an example of how inequity occurs in the actual life of an individual. And this is about my son, Robert, who I know very well, of course, now aged 29. Can you imagine for a minute or two that you begin life with severe physical disabilities? Your family does everything possible to assure you're equipped for your educational journey, as they know how important that is for your future life. You show enormous promise intellectually, socially, and your motivation to learn is enormous. In primary school, you start dictating books because you're visually impaired as one of your disabilities. You dictate books for the other kids for the unit because you deem that the baby books are just not very appealing or inappropriate. You write a play with a fellow student to put on for the class. You design your own board game. You are instrumental in answering trivia questions and helping your adult team to win many times. You absorb information you hear from every source available, and you put that information to good use. You have an excellent memory, which is a great asset. Your school achievements are very good, especially in English and drama, and a couple of very inclusive teachers include you in plays, drumming troupe, and support you to complete Certificate 4 live production and events. And yet, when it comes time to sit your QTAC exams, you're excluded, as the necessary accommodations are not available to you. You're extremely disappointed by this, as you have uni aspirations. Nevertheless, you look for some avenue of study. You settle on doing Certificate 4 in events management. You pass most of the modules, but not all, because the accommodations, suitable accommodations for your disability, ataxia, are not able to be made. After leaving school, you express an interest in learning to read. You want to write emails and become more independent in your Facebook interactions. And despite 12 years of schooling, no one had figured out how to teach you to read. So your parents engage a tutor and work out who presents you with interesting material from ancient history and space, and supplies you with rich materials, and you get large print books to begin your reading journey. However, you're a bit on the back foot for gaining employment. Nevertheless, you develop your skills in creative writing and photography through community opportunities such as the Writers' Centre, Access Arts and AFM. Up from the Margins. Your interest in philosophy is followed up by attending a community access course at UQ, which you absolutely love. In the meantime, you sign up with a specialist disability employment service, and after 4 long years of angst, they still have not been able to assist you to gain employment. Your personal networks come to the party, however, and you are offered a job in a company aligned with your father's work of 8 hours per week. Unfortunately, you are engaged with the Workplace Training and Assessment Department, and this keeps you stuck on a 50% competency rating for a further 4 years. It turns out this is due to the assessor's inability to assess you on how to assess you. He assesses you on your typing speed, bearing in mind that with cerebral palsy, you can only manage to reach a typing speed of 8 words a minute, and you don't even need typing to be able to do your job. So nevertheless, you do very well. You're achieving 100% in your work, and you're a valued employee, and you can edit for them, because you're good at that, very large documents and input into their brochures on the relevance of words and pictures in their brochures from a disability perspective. This service, in commas, is detached from by you after various attempts to improve the service fail, and also you detach from the employment service. You thrive in the work environment with your passion as a fantasy and sci-fi writer, are twice published and completing your first novel. Your achievements are despite the formal structures that are supposed to help you gain and keep employment. However, long-term financial security remains tenuous. You need formal qualifications and more hours of work. Still got goals on the agenda at age 29. It is obvious to those of us at the coalface that workplace equity begins, or should begin, with the education system. It is well known that thinking and preparing for employment opportunities needs to begin about year 9 or 10. And I was aligned for many years with Queensland Parents for People with a Disability, and we produced a document on the transition, successful transition from high school to post-school. The formal structures to support people with a disability to gain employment are woefully inept. People with disabilities start out severely disadvantaged, and this is compounded by every system that is supposed to support them. It is my own experience, and that of most of my peers, that families have to find alternative ways for their children to gain an adequate education, often post-school, and employment. Solutions. A multifaceted approach is needed. Consulting with those who know what works and tapping into their knowledge and expertise. For example, people with a disability themselves, and where relevant, their families and advocates. Experts on inclusive education. And with places such as CREW, over 30 years of education of the disability sector on how to achieve good lives for people with a disability. And conferences such as Imagine More, which has just happened in the last week, where great information and knowledge is presented. Employer education about people with disability in the workforce, and creating opportunities for conduits between appropriate services and employers, such as years ago I remember hearing about in Alberta, Canada, how they have a huge expo every year, and it's just the thing that happens every year, and employers seek out, go there to find workers. Amazing stuff. Public education campaigns positively promoting meaningful employment of people with disability. And the other thing that is needed is to identify what action needs to take place. I'd like to tell you about a service that I was involved with 15 years. And I think that these successful services need to be closely examined. It was a real-life successful program. It was a little service within the CRS specialist service, and it supported people both personally and in their work, mostly behind the scenes, but sometimes on the job, who had a mental health issues and an acquired brain injury. They had been placed in work, rehabilitated, if you like, placed in work prior to be given a support worker. This program was extremely successful for about 30 years, and it cost very little to provide. And I also, while I was working at that service, I did read research, which I've been trying to track down and haven't been able to, about how that's what it takes and how successful it is to do that. And unfortunately, that service was cut when a new manager came in and had to cut something. So this little discreet service, which hardly cost anything, I think it was $70,000 a year at the time, this is 15 years ago, was cut. Some of the difficulties faced are explained in the book, Justice for People with Disability, Legal and Institutional Issues. In this book, Tom Bellamy explains the evolution of the most important values governing the relationship between people with disabilities and society. He states that to achieve sustainable change, advances must occur in each of the 4 distinct areas of knowledge and action: cultural, governmental, organisational and procedural. He describes the advances in these spheres as interdependent, in the sense that changes within each arena create the tension that fuels reform within the others. So, all the work that we put into inclusive education, I was involved in that at every level for about 20 years. All the things that we have done can very quickly be eroded if you don't have this multifaceted approach. I believe thought needs to be given to who could coordinate such improvements to facilitate actual workplace equity for people with disabilities in Queensland and indeed in this country. My question to you all is, as my son pointed out when I ran this talk past him, what action can be taken to achieve this and by whom? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn,